A modest woman asked to play a damaged piano as a prank unexpectedly captivates the audience with her remarkable skill. In the bustling realm of New York City's top musicians, Sarah Miller remained unnoticed, a cleaner with roughened hands and no formal education. As esteemed pianists assembled for the annual Steinberg competition, the seasoned judge Eleanor Whitmore directed her gaze toward the neglected piano in the corner, anticipating a moment of embarrassment. However, as Sarah's fingers grazed those keys, the ensuing moment rendered the entire auditorium utterly silent. Sarah Miller wiped her brow with the back of her hand, completing the task of polishing the final gleaming grand piano at the Manhattan Music Academy. The soft glow of the morning sun poured through the lofty windows, creating warm, golden patches on the gleaming wooden floor. At 38, Sarah's once gentle hands bore the evidence of her labor, marked with calluses from years spent tending to the Academy's revered halls. "That's all for today, Mrs. Henderson," she announced to the elderly receptionist, who remained steadfast at her post, watching over the entrance with unwavering dedication. "Thank you, my dear. Remember, they are preparing for the Steinberg competition this evening. It's wise to make an exit before those theatrical talents show up." Sarah nodded, yet remained still, not making her way to the exit. Instead, her gaze wandered to the grandest of the pianos, a stunning Steinway that shimmered like a black diamond beneath the chandeliers. Once she was confident that Mrs. Henderson had immersed herself back into her crossword puzzle, Sarah quietly settled onto the bench. She remained still, her hands poised above the keys, lost in a reverie of memories. Her mother worked as a waitress at a jazz club in Brooklyn. Once the doors were locked and the floors were cleared, with chairs neatly piled on tables, the pianist, a seasoned gentleman whose eyes twinkled with warmth, would allow 7-year-old Sarah to wander across the keyboard while her mother tallied the tips. "You've got it, my dear," he would say. "Some individuals dedicate their entire lives to studying music and still never discover the innate talent you possess." However, her mother fell ill. In voices stacked high, the piano lessons that generous souls had organized faded into the background. Existence turned into a struggle for survival rather than a pursuit of dreams. Sarah gently rested her fingers on the cool keys, mindful not to apply any pressure. For years, she had immersed herself in the ritual of cleaning instruments she never touched, meticulously polishing wood that resonated with melodies she never created. "I was unaware that the janitors participated." Sarah leaped, almost sending the bench crashing over. A young man, his kind eyes framed by the crisp lines of a security guard's uniform, stood in the doorway. "I do not. I was merely—" Sarah stumbled over her words, feeling a flush of embarrassment. "Hey, no criticism from me." He lifted his hands in a gesture of submission. "Greetings, I'm Miguel, the new night security personnel." "Sarah." She rose swiftly, adjusting her uniform with care. "I ought to take my leave." "There's no obligation to do so." Miguel gestured toward the piano. "Could you play something?" Sarah dismissed the idea with a shake of her head. "I don't actually engage in playing." Miguel raised an eyebrow in doubt. "Your hands convey a different message." Sarah looked at her fingers, still poised as if about to strike invisible keys. "I never truly had lessons." She collected her cleaning tools. "Furthermore, tools of this nature aren't suited for individuals like myself." Miguel inclined his head thoughtfully. "What sort of individuals do you represent?" The inquiry lingered, straightforward yet cutting. Sarah found herself at a loss for words that wouldn't echo her surrender. "Did you know," Miguel said, shattering the quiet, "that there's a wild card spot in the Steinberg competition this weekend? One position available for an undisclosed participant. Auditions are set for tomorrow morning." Sarah's laughter resonated through the vacant hall. "Sure, I'll just stroll in wearing my cleaning uniform and challenge those who have been honing their skills since they could walk." "Why not indeed?" Miguel's voice carried a gentle yet earnest quality. "What's the worst that could occur? Embarrassment? Mockery? Validation of all the beliefs I've held for 2 decades? Or," Miguel argued, "the contrary." As Sarah made her way back to her cozy apartment in Queens that evening, Miguel's words lingered in her mind like a haunting tune. As she stepped outside her building, she paused to sift through her mail. Amidst the bills and flyers lay a glossy pamphlet that seemed to have been inadvertently included. A promotional piece for the Steinberg competition showcasing images of past champions. Their expressions radiated assurance and refinement, a glimpse into a realm Sarah had only observed through the glass she wiped clean. As she ascended the stairs to her apartment, her fingers danced along the railing, crafting a silent melody that resonated solely within her mind. The following morning, Sarah found herself lingering after her shift, observing the audition committee as they prepared in the main recital hall. Participants vying for the wild card position arrived in meticulously crafted attire, clutching leather portfolios brimming with sheet music. They conversed with assured voices about conservatories and global contests, while Sarah pressed herself against the wall, still clad in her gray uniform. "You arrived." Miguel emerged next to her, his security uniform impeccably pressed. Sarah gently shook her head, a subtle gesture that spoke volumes. "I'm merely observing. The sign-up sheet can be found over there." He gestured to a table where a stern woman with steel gray hair meticulously compared names on a list. "This is your final opportunity. Only the first 20 applicants will be considered. I haven't prepared anything. I lack the sheet music. My wardrobe is filled with garments that all carry the scent of cleaning supplies." Sarah's justification spilled forth. Miguel delved into his jacket and retrieved a neatly folded piece of paper. "Sign-up form. I picked one up earlier." "Miguel." Observe how he interrupted her with a soft touch. "I listened to you yesterday. I was present, though unnoticed, as I listened to your music fill the space when you believed you were alone." Sarah's cheeks turned a deep shade of crimson. "You were observing me closely. While conducting my security rounds, I encountered some intriguing sounds." He hesitated, selecting his phrases with precision. "Sarah, I have been employed here for 5 years. I've come across students who have dedicated their entire lives to training. Your performance was unique. It lacked sophistication." She provided authenticity. He made the necessary adjustments. "It felt as though you were engaged in a dialogue with the piano." A chime echoed, signaling that the auditions were set to commence in 5 minutes. Sarah felt her heart race as Miguel handed her the form, the weight of the moment palpable in the air. "You don't have to go through with this," he said, "but I believe you'll look back and wish you had." Just as she was about to reply, a ruckus at the entrance captured their focus. A cadre of elegantly attired individuals made their entrance, with an elderly lady at the forefront, her pristine white hair, pearl earrings, and light beige suit jacket exuding an air of sophistication. Even Sarah acknowledged her presence. Eleanor Whitmore, the renowned pianist who had graced concert halls across the globe, now took on the role of the competition's chief judge. The other committee members gravitated towards her, responding with nods as she shared her thoughts and chuckling at her witty comments. Sarah observed Eleanor as she scanned the room with a discerning look, her eyes lingering on the cleaning cart that Sarah had left behind. "Final opportunity for wild card auditions," declared the woman at the registration table. A constriction gripped Sarah's chest. Not exactly bravery, but maybe its more subdued sibling, resistance. A bold stand against the whisper that had echoed in her mind for years, insisting that music was not meant for those who scrubbed floors, that aspirations were extravagant treasures beyond her reach. "Here," Sarah remarked as she moved closer to the table and pushed her quickly filled-out form across the surface. "I would like to audition." The woman glanced up, her eyes momentarily widening at Sarah's uniform before her composed demeanor returned. "What is your name?" "Sarah Miller." "What about your work?" Sarah paused, uncertainty flickering in her mind. "It is. Authentic?" "A piece I crafted." This elicited a raised eyebrow. "The committee generally anticipates traditional repertoire." "It's everything I possess," Sarah confessed. The woman let out a soft sigh, jotting down a note on her clipboard. "Absolutely. You will come in last place. Kindly stand over there with the rest of the group." Sarah stepped into the circle of contestants, acutely conscious of her mismatched appearance. Some gazed unabashedly, while others murmured discreetly behind their palms. A young man clad in a sharp suit wore a sly smile. "I believe you've entered the incorrect room," he remarked, his voice directed towards Carrie. "The custodial services can be found just down the hall." While a few chuckled around her, Sarah remained focused, her gaze locked on the audition room door, mentally ticking off the seconds until she would step into the spotlight. This could either become one of the most humiliating experiences she would ever face, or she chose to suppress the thought entirely. Hope proved to be a perilous concept for those who sought to navigate life in its absence. The audition hall slowly cleared as participants exited, some beaming with joy, while others struggled to hold back their tears. Sarah lingered in her corner, observing the young man who had ridiculed her earlier as he exited with a victorious grin. The committee was quite taken aback, he declared to an empty room. Ms. Whitmore herself remarked that my Chopin conveyed remarkable emotional depth. Sarah felt a knot in her stomach. She had listened to him perform from behind the door, each note executed with precision, Yet there was a certain lifelessness to it, as if that was precisely what the judges desired. Sarah Miller summoned the assistant, her voice indicating that she had uttered the name several times before. With a hesitant stride, Sarah stepped into the audition room. At a long table, 3 judges convened. A middle-aged man with spectacles resting on his nose, a younger woman with a strict bun, and at the center, Eleanor Whitmore herself. A modest gathering of music faculty, former contestants, and competition staff watched from behind. Ms. Miller, Eleanor remarked, referring to her notes. It states that you are presenting an original piece. Absolutely, ma'am. Eleanor's meticulously drawn eyebrows arched elegantly. What about your musical background? Sarah paused, uncertainty flickering in her mind. I have learned on my own. A murmur of intrigue swept across the crowd. The youthful judge leaned in to murmur a few words to Eleanor, who responded with a barely noticeable nod. I see, Eleanor remarked, a playful lilt in her tone. So, do you have a position at the academy? Heat flooded Sarah's cheeks. I work in the cleaning department. Increased murmurs, now lacking in subtlety. Sarah captured snippets. Is this some kind of prank? What a futile endeavor. Eleanor observed Sarah intently for a prolonged moment, then motioned toward the shining grand piano that occupied the heart of the room. Very well, Ms. Miller, you may continue. Sarah stepped closer to the instrument, its gleaming surface mirroring the overhead lights with a captivating brilliance. This instrument was the jewel of the Academy, a concert grand reserved exclusively for the most esteemed performances. She perched on the bench, shifting her stance, acutely conscious of the gaze of every onlooker in the room, bracing for disappointment. With a graceful lift of her hands, Eleanor prepared herself, clearing her throat in anticipation. Indeed, Ms. Miller, she remarked, her voice dripping with insincere sympathy. It seems that instrument may not be the best fit for this audition. The judge's brow furrowed in disapproval. Yet Eleanor pressed on. I think there's another piano that could be a more fitting choice. She gestured towards the distant corner of the room, where an ancient upright piano resided, its wooden exterior worn and faded with time. That one is yet to be fine-tuned for the competition. An amateur performance would find it more accommodating. The message was unmistakable. Eleanor deemed Sarah unworthy of the grand piano. Sarah sensed the weight of numerous gazes upon her, anticipating her response, hoping for signs of humiliation or fury. Instead, she composed herself and approached the upright piano with grace. During her childhood, she had encountered far inferior instruments, such as out-of-tune pianos in community centers and electronic keyboards with missing keys. The bench groaned softly under her weight as she settled down. In close proximity, she noticed the piano's imperfections. The chipped keys, the worn pedals, and the faded fallboard. She struck middle C, grimacing at the subtly off-key sound. This was not merely aged. It had been intentionally overlooked. I'm afraid that one hasn't been serviced in quite some time, Eleanor remarked, her smirk now fully evident. If you find it too difficult, feel free to step back from your application. The young judge appeared uneasy. Maybe we ought to. No, Sarah interrupted, surprising herself with her calm resolve. This piano is quite nice. Eleanor's smile grew strained. As you desire. At your convenience. Sarah rested her hands on the keyboard, sensing the varied pressure of the keys under her fingertips. In the stillness of the room, she caught the soft sound of laughter drifting from the back row. She gently closed her eyes, blocking out the critical gazes and the knowing grins. For an instant, she found herself transported to that Brooklyn jazz club, a young girl unearthing the magic of music for the first time, before the world had instilled any seeds of self-doubt within her. With a deep breath, she started to play. Sarah's fingers lingered above the keys, poised in anticipation. She started to play. The initial notes surfaced cautiously, somewhat muted by the piano's aged hammers. One person in the crowd suppressed a chuckle, yet Sarah continued undeterred. Her left hand established a steady, confident rhythm, while her right hand ventured into a straightforward melody. The aged piano emitted a reluctant sound, its tone roughened by years of disuse and wear. Even amidst its flaws, there was an undeniable quality in the music that drew one in. Eleanor's meticulously crafted expression wavered just a bit. This was far from the clumsy, inexperienced display she had anticipated. The melody evolved into a rich tapestry, Sarah's hands dancing with newfound assurance. Eleanor exclaimed, her voice cutting through the silence. An intriguing perspective indeed. However, maybe a more traditional approach would more effectively showcase your abilities? Could it be a Chopinitude? Sarah hesitated, her fingers lingering on the keys. The disruption was intentional, a strategy designed to unsettle her composure. I don't play Chopin, Sarah replied softly. No, not even a basic waltz? Eleanor's tone was a delightful yet dangerous allure. Surely anyone who considers themselves a pianist can handle that? The male judge adjusted his position, a hint of discomfort evident in his demeanor. Eleanor, we ought to allow her to proceed. Eleanor interjected, stating that Ms. Miller merely shows some fundamental skill with the established repertoire. Anyone can create spontaneous notes. The words struck like a blow. Sarah sensed a change in the atmosphere as numerous audience members expressed their concurrence with subtle nods. Perhaps, Eleanor said, standing up and making her way to the ancient piano, I can showcase what we need. She waved her hand at Sarah to step aside, like royalty sending away an attendant. Sarah remained still, her legs stiff, while Eleanor stepped forward to the bench, her expression revealing clear disapproval as she made adjustments. This instrument presents quite a challenge, Eleanor remarked to the audience, executing a swift scale that exposed the piano's uneven tuning. Yet a genuine artist evolves. She started to play a Chopin nocturne, her technique smooth and sophisticated even with the piano's imperfections. The communication was unmistakable. Even through this lesser device, a true musician could create something beautiful. Eleanor played for precisely 2 minutes, just long enough to convey her message, then ceased and faced Sarah. That's the level of control we expect, she stated, her voice resonating throughout the entire space. Would you like to give it another shot with a refined piece? Or shall we wrap up your audition here? Heat surged to Sarah's face. The crowd held its breath, many anticipating her to concede and retreat. Even the compassionate male judge was focused on his notes, steering clear of her gaze. Yet, a certain resolve began to take root within Sarah. She had devoted her life to making room for individuals like Eleanor, those who thought that talent was reserved for those with the appropriate lineage, the ideal mentors, the correct upbringing. I'd like to proceed, she stated, with my own work. Eleanor's meticulously shaped eyebrows arched in astonishment, yet she vacated the bench with a nonchalant gesture. Quite so, she remarked, although I think the committee has observed sufficient evidence. Sarah settled back into her seat, paying no mind to the whispers weaving through the crowd. Her hands rested confidently on the keys, devoid of hesitation, free from uncertainty. She shut her eyes for a brief instant, and upon reopening them, a shift had occurred in her demeanor. She started to play. The change was instant and unmistakable. What began as a straightforward tune has now blossomed into something more intricate, profound. Her left hand conjured elaborate rhythms that seemed beyond the reach of a self-taught individual, while her right crafted intricate patterns that floated gracefully above the bass line. The ancient piano appeared to come alive with her gentle caress. Notes that had previously seemed lackluster now resonated with unexpected brilliance, as if the instrument were attuned to her desires rather than constrained by its material form. A silver-haired gentleman with sturdy spectacles leaned in, his forehead creased with focus. A young woman paused in her note-taking, her pen hovering just above the paper. Even the most doubtful onlookers were rendered mute, entranced by the spectacle unfolding before them. Sarah's music wove a narrative of hardship and resilience, revealing beauty in the most surprising corners. She wove together classical structure with subtle hints of the jazz that had surrounded her in childhood, creating harmonies that echoed the essence of urban streets and the intimacy of late-night conversations. The piece developed gradually, gaining strength as it progressed. Sarah's hands danced with effortless grace, her body gently swaying as she surrendered entirely to the rhythm of the music. A single strand of hair drifted down, brushing against her face, yet she remained oblivious to its presence. Eleanor's smile had become rigid, hardened into a fragile facade. She cast a quick look at her fellow judges. The woman observed Sarah with open amazement while the man took off his glasses, cleaning them without need, as if he struggled to comprehend the sight before him. As Sarah approached the peak of her composition, the music ascended past the limitations of the worn upright, transcending the refined recital hall and shattering the preconceived notions that had lingered in the air moments earlier. Everyone in attendance understood they were experiencing something remarkable, a display of talent in its most authentic state, unrestrained by norms or anticipations. As the last note lingered in the air, Sarah's fingers gracefully rose from the keys. The sound hung in the atmosphere, gradually dissipating into quietude. Utter stillness. For 5 excruciating seconds, silence enveloped the room and not a single soul stirred or uttered a word. The shared breath hung in the air, caught in a moment of anticipation. Suddenly, from the rear of the room, a round of applause erupted. The noise shattered the enchantment, and in an instant, the whole crowd sprang to their feet. The applause resonated throughout the recital hall, intensifying instead of diminishing. A group of senior audience members in the rear, benefactors who had experienced the artistry of the finest pianists, expressed their enthusiasm most vocally, their expressions glowing with the delight of true revelation. Sarah sat at the piano, taken aback by the reaction. This was not merely a courteous nod, it was an acknowledgement stripped down to its essence. The judge stood up from his chair, applause still echoing around him. The young female judge stepped forward, her composed demeanor giving way to a bright smile. Only Eleanor stayed in her seat, her hands tightly clasped in her lap, her face a mask of disbelief. Once the applause started to fade, the male judge took the floor. "Ms. Miller, that was truly remarkable." He hesitated, seeking the right words to capture the significance of the moment. "That was remarkable, genuinely remarkable." The intricate nature of the piece, the female judge remarked, her tone reflecting true appreciation, would pose a significant challenge even for pianists with years of rigorous training. However, the way you convey emotions and the storytelling aspect is an innate talent that cannot be learned. Sarah's hands quivered ever so slightly as she finally rose to her feet. "Thank you," she stated with quiet sincerity. "Where did you learn to play like that?" a voice rang out from the audience. Sarah cast her eyes toward the aged piano, her steadfast ally in this unforeseen victory. "Life," she replied. "Life has been my teacher." Eleanor finally stood up, adjusting her perfectly tailored suit jacket. Her eyes locked with Sarah's, and in that instant an unspoken connection formed, a hesitant recognition shared between two artists. The selection process for wild cards typically demands careful consideration by the committee, Eleanor remarked, her tone measured and composed. "However, I am convinced that we have arrived at a remarkable agreement." She glanced at her fellow judges, who responded with enthusiastic nods. "Sarah Miller," Eleanor continued. "Congratulations on being selected as this year's wild card finalist for the Steinberg competition." New waves of applause surged forth. Miguel emerged at the door, having slipped in unnoticed during the performance, his face beaming with a broad smile. As the crowd gathered around her, showering her with congratulations and inquiries, Sarah sensed a gentle touch on her arm. She glanced over to see Eleanor beside her as the audience's focus shifted for a brief moment. Eleanor remarked softly, "You played that old piano as though it were a Steinway." "It warranted the opportunity to be acknowledged," Sarah responded. Eleanor gazed at her intently for a prolonged moment. "It seems we may have both miscalculated." With a gentle gesture, she reached out her hand, and after a moment of uncertainty, Sarah accepted it. Eleanor mentioned that the finals of the competition are set to commence next week. "If you're open to it, I could provide some insights, not to alter your approach," she quickly clarified, noticing Sarah's reaction, "but to assist you in getting ready for what lies ahead." With a smile, Sarah reflected on the extensive journey that had led her to this very moment. "I would appreciate that." As the reporters assembled and an air of anticipation permeated the hall, Sarah locked eyes with Miguel from across the space. He flashed her a thumbs up and silently conveyed, "Told you so." Sarah Miller, the cleaning woman with calloused hands and no formal training, had just transformed the music world's understanding of what could be achieved, and even more significantly, she had transformed her own life. At times, remarkable ability lurks in the open, patiently awaiting the bravery to come forth. Have you ever felt that someone didn't fully recognize your potential? We invite you to share your narrative in the comments section below. If you found joy in this adventure of exploration and victory, be sure to subscribe for more uplifting stories from unlikely champions. From where are you tuning in today? Keep in mind that genuine ability doesn't require approval to illuminate.